December 18, 1944, 4:32 p.m. Bastogne, Belgium. The town of Bastogne looked like something from a postcard that had been crumpled and thrown away. Snow covered the cobblestone streets, but it couldn't hide the damage. Artillery shells had torn holes in buildings, leaving exposed beams and shattered windows staring like empty eye sockets. Civilians were still evacuating, pushing carts loaded with whatever possessions they could carry, their faces blank with the shock of having their quiet lives transformed into a battlefield. Jack Morrison stood at the edge of his foxhole on the northern perimeter, watching the endless stream of refugees flowing past American defensive positions. An old woman struggled with a suitcase that was clearly too heavy for her. A young mother carried a crying infant while trying to hold the hand of a toddler who could barely walk through the deep snow. A man who looked to be in his 70s pushed a wheelbarrow containing what appeared to be his entire life's possessions. "We should help them," Tommy said quietly from beside him. Tommy Rodriguez had always had a soft heart, even after everything they'd been through. Even after D-Day and Normandy and Holland, he still couldn't completely harden himself to civilian suffering. "We can't," Jack said, and he hated how cold his voice sounded. "Crawford's orders. We stay in position. The Germans could hit us any minute." Tommy nodded, understanding but not liking it. They both knew the brutal mathematics of war. If they abandoned their positions to help refugees, the defensive line would weaken. If the line weakened, the Germans would break through. If the Germans broke through, thousands more civilians would die. So they stayed in their holes and watched people suffer, and they tried not to think about their own families back home. The past 2 days had been a nightmare of constant movement and sporadic fighting. After the initial German assault on December 16th, Easy Company had conducted a fighting withdrawal through the Ardennes forest, trading space for time, trying to stay ahead of the advancing panzers while maintaining unit cohesion. They'd lost men during the retreat. Private Billy Henderson, the kid from Tennessee who'd been screaming for a medic during the artillery barrage, had died before Doc Hensley could reach him. Sergeant Mike Torres from 2nd Squad had been killed by a sniper. 3 more men had simply disappeared in the chaos, either captured or dead in the forest, their fate unknown. By the afternoon of December 17th, what remained of the 101st Airborne Division had reached Bastogne and immediately began establishing defensive positions around the town. The orders from division were clear and simple: hold Bastogne at all costs. The town sat at the junction of 7 major roads, and whoever controlled it controlled movement through the entire region. If the Germans captured Bastogne, they could continue their advance westward. If the Americans held it, the German offensive would stall. It was that simple and that complicated. The defensive perimeter. Jack and Tommy's foxhole was part of a defensive line that stretched across the northern approach to Bastogne. To their left was Corporal Mike "Doc" Hensley, their medic, who dug in with Private Joey Russo. To their right was Sergeant Bill Crawford with Private Pete Williams. Behind them, deeper in the town, artillery positions had been established, along with command posts and aid stations. The foxholes were deeper now than they'd been in the forest. They'd had time to dig properly, using pickaxes to break through the frozen earth, then shovels to clear the loosened soil. Each hole was roughly 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and deep enough that a man could stand up in it without exposing his head above ground level. They'd piled the excavated dirt in front to create a low parapet, and they'd scrounged pieces of wood and metal to reinforce the edges. It still wasn't enough. A direct hit from artillery would collapse the whole thing, but it was better than nothing, and better than nothing was all they had. "How much ammo you got?" Jack asked, going through his daily ritual of inventory. In combat, you counted your ammunition the way a miser counted gold. Your life depended on knowing exactly what resources you had available. Tommy checked his pouches and the spare magazines for his bar. 6 magazines for the bar, maybe 120 rounds total, plus 8 clips for my M1, about 70 rounds there, 2 grenades. He looked up at Jack. "You." 60 rounds for the Garand, 3 grenades, 1 morphine syrette. Jack didn't mention that the morphine was supposed to be turned in to Doc Hensley. He'd kept it just in case one of them got hit so badly that the only mercy left was chemical oblivion. They both knew it wasn't enough ammunition. Not nearly enough. Before the German offensive, a soldier was supposed to carry at least 80 rounds for his M1 Garand, plus grenades, plus whatever else his role required. Bar gunners like Tommy were supposed to have at least 200 rounds, but supply lines had been cut. The German advance had been so fast and so unexpected that American supply units were still scrambling to catch up. Resupply convoys supposed to come in tonight, Tommy said, not sounding convinced. If it can get through, Jack added. The Germans were tightening their encirclement. Every hour the ring drew a little tighter. Soon, very soon, nothing would be getting in or out of Bastogne except by air. And with the winter weather closing in, even that wouldn't be possible. As if reading his thoughts, Tommy looked up at the overcast sky. Heavy gray clouds hung low, promising more snow. Weather's getting worse. Yeah. Think we're gonna make it out of this, Jackie. Jack was quiet for a long moment. He could lie. He could tell Tommy what his friend wanted to hear, that everything would be fine, that they'd get through this just like they'd gotten through Normandy and Holland. But they'd been through too much together for lies. I don't know, Jack said honestly, but I know we're going to fight like hell, and whatever happens, we stick together, right? Tommy extended his hand. Jack gripped it firmly. It was the same handshake they'd shared before every jump, every battle, every moment when death seemed certain. It was their ritual, their promise, their bond. Together, Tommy agreed, to the end. December 19th, 1944, 6:15 a.m., the morning attack. The Germans attacked at dawn, just as the first gray light was beginning to seep across the frozen landscape. There was no artillery barrage this time, no warning. Just the sudden eruption of small arms fire as German infantry emerged from the tree line about 300 yards north of Jack's position. Contact front, Crawford's voice rang out clear and strong. Hold your fire until they're in range. Make every shot count. Jack pressed himself against the forward wall of his foxhole, rifle ready, watching the Germans advance. They moved in short rushes, squad by squad, using whatever cover the terrain provided. These weren't the half-trained conscripts the Americans had been facing in recent months. These were veterans, probably pulled from the Eastern Front, men who knew what they were doing. 250 yards, 200 yards. The Germans kept coming, their gray uniforms stark against the white snow. Steady, Crawford called out, steady. 150 yards. Jack could see individual faces now. Young men, old men, all of them determined, all of them trying to kill him. Fire. The American line erupted. Jack sighted on a German soldier and squeezed the trigger. The M1 kicked against his shoulder. The German fell. Jack chambered another round, found another target, fired. Again. Again. Beside him, Tommy's bar chattered in controlled bursts, each burst putting down 3 or 4 rounds with deadly accuracy. The German advance staggered. Men fell, clutching wounds, dropping into the snow. But they didn't break. They went to ground, returning fire, and suddenly the air was full of bullets. Rounds cracked overhead, snapped past Jack's head, buried themselves in the dirt parapet with meaty thunks. Grenade, someone shouted. Jack ducked instinctively. The explosion came a second later, maybe 20 yards to his left. Dirt and snow rained down. Someone screamed. Jack risked a quick look and saw Private Williams clutching his face, blood streaming between his fingers. Medic, Crawford was shouting. Doc, Williams is hit. But Doc Hensley was already moving, scrambling from his foxhole toward Williams, completely exposed, running through enemy fire because that's what medics did. They ran toward the screaming when everyone else's instinct was to run away. Jack provided covering fire, shooting at any German who exposed himself, trying to keep their heads down while Doc worked. Beside him, Tommy did the same, his bar spitting fire. Doc reached Williams, pulled him into cover, started working on him. Blood, so much blood. Williams was screaming, a high-pitched sound that cut through all the other noise of battle. The German assault continued for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. They came in waves, each wave getting a little closer before being driven back. American ammunition stocks dwindled with terrifying speed. Jack burned through 3 clips, 24 rounds, in what felt like seconds. His rifle barrel was hot enough to raise steam in the cold air. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack broke off. The Germans fell back, leaving their dead and wounded scattered across the snow-covered field. The shooting tapered off, then stopped, leaving only the moans of wounded men and the ringing in Jack's ears. "Ammo check," Crawford ordered. "Sound off." Jack counted his remaining rounds, 36, less than half of what he'd started with. Tommy had 2 magazines left for his bar, maybe 60 rounds, not enough. Not nearly enough if the Germans came again. And they would come again. Jack could see them in the tree line, regrouping, preparing. This had just been a probe, a test of American defenses. The real assault would come later. "Williams is bad," Doc Hensley called out. He'd gotten the bleeding stopped, but the young soldier's face was a mess. Shrapnel from the grenade had torn through his left cheek and eye. "I need to get him to the aid station." "Go," Crawford said. "Take him, but get back here quick." Doc and another soldier dragged Williams out of his foxhole and started pulling him toward the rear. Jack watched them go and tried not to think about how many more men would be making that journey before this was over. 2:30 p.m. The ammunition crisis. By mid-afternoon, the ammunition situation had become critical. Another German probe at noon had cost them dearly. They'd held, but only by the narrowest of margins. Now Jack was down to 18 rounds. Tommy had 1 magazine for his bar and 8 rounds for his M1. They were shooting men armed with nothing but prayers and determination. "This is fucked," Joey Russo said from the foxhole to their left. He was trying for humor, but his voice shook. "We're gonna end up throwing rocks at them." "Bayonets," Tommy corrected. "We'll use bayonets before rocks." "Great, that makes me feel so much better." A runner came up from the rear, a young private Jack didn't recognize. "Crawford, Captain wants to see you at the CP." Crawford climbed out of his foxhole and jogged toward the rear. He was back 10 minutes later, his face grim. "All right, listen up," he called out, moving down the line so everyone could hear. "The resupply convoy didn't make it through. Germans hid it about 5 miles out. We're not getting resupplied tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either." Silence. Then Joey spoke up, his voice tight with poorly concealed fear. "Sarge, we're almost out of ammo. What are we supposed to fight with?" "Whatever you've got. Fix bayonets if you have to. Throw dirt in their eyes, I don't care, but you will hold this line. Is that clear?" "Clear, Sarge." Crawford moved back to his position. Jack and Tommy looked at each other. 18 rounds. 1 magazine, against an entire German army. "Well," Tommy said after a moment, "at least it can't get any worse." That's when the artillery started. The barrage. The first shell hit about 100 yards behind their position, exploding with a thunderous roar that shook the ground. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire area was being systematically pounded by German artillery. Jack and Tommy threw themselves into the bottom of their foxhole as the world exploded around them. This was worse than the barrage in the forest 2 days ago. The Germans had brought up heavier guns, and they were walking the barrage across the American positions with deadly precision. A shell landed directly on the foxhole 30 yards to their right. The explosion was massive, a column of fire and dirt that reached 50 feet into the air. When the smoke cleared, the foxhole was gone, just a crater. The 2 men who'd been in it had simply ceased to exist. Another shell. Another. Trees disintegrated. Buildings collapsed. The earth heaved and bucked like something alive and in pain. Jack pressed himself against Tommy, both of them trying to become one with the frozen earth, trying to will themselves to be smaller, less of a target, less likely to be chosen by the random hand of death that was reaching down from the sky. Something hit Jack's helmet with a metallic ring that made his ears ring. Shrapnel. A piece of hot metal the size of his thumb had struck his helmet and deflected off, leaving a deep groove in the steel. Another inch lower and it would have taken off the top of his head. The barrage went on and on. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Time became meaningless. There was only the endless thunder of explosions, the pressure waves that squeezed the air from your lungs, the terror of knowing that the next shell might have your name on it and there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. Then finally it stopped. The last echoes rolled away across the frozen landscape, and silence fell. A silence somehow more terrible than the noise because you knew what came next. The German infantry would be right behind the barrage. 3:45 p.m., fighting on empty. Jack hauled himself up, ears ringing so badly he could barely hear. Blood trickled from his nose, probably from the overpressure of nearby explosions. His hands shook as he raised his rifle and looked toward the tree line. They were coming. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. A gray tide flowing across the white landscape, coming to finish what the artillery had started. "Here they come," Crawford's voice, distant and distorted through the ringing in Jack's ears. "Hold the line, make them pay for every inch." Jack found a target and fired. 17 rounds left. Another target. 16 rounds. The Germans kept coming. Beside him, Tommy opened up with his bar the last magazine. 60 rounds between them and death. The fighting became desperate, chaotic. Germans reached the outer foxholes, and the battle dissolved into close-quarters brutality. Jack saw Russo grappling with a German soldier, both of them fighting for control of a rifle. He shot the German, and Russo nodded thanks before being dragged back down into his foxhole by another attacker. Jack's rifle clicked empty, out of ammunition. He dropped it and drew his pistol, a .45 caliber M1911 that he'd carried since D-Day but rarely fired. 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 shots between him and the end. A German soldier appeared at the edge of his foxhole, rifle raised. Jack shot him twice in the chest. The man fell backward. 6 rounds left. Another German coming from the left. Jack turned and fired. 5 rounds. Tommy's bar had gone silent. Empty. He'd drawn his own pistol and was fighting beside Jack, both of them standing back to back in their foxhole, shooting at anything that moved. 4 rounds, 3, 2. This is it, Jack thought with strange clarity. This is how it ends. Not with some dramatic last stand, but with 2 soldiers out of ammunition, standing in a hole, waiting for the bullet with their name on it. Then the most beautiful sound Jack had ever heard cut through the chaos. The distinctive chatter of American .50 caliber machine guns, opening up from positions behind them. Someone had brought up the heavy weapons, and they were tearing into the German assault with devastating effect. The German advance faltered. Soldiers went to ground or fell, cut down by the heavy machine gun fire. Officers tried to rally them, but the momentum was broken. Slowly, then faster, the Germans began to fall back. Jack collapsed against the wall of his foxhole, pistol hanging loose in his hand. 1 round left. 1 single round, and then he would have been fighting with his knife, or his hands, or his teeth. Jesus Christ, Tommy breathed. He was shaking, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. Jackie, I thought that was it. Me too. They sat there in silence for a moment, too exhausted to move, too shocked to speak. Around them the sounds of battle faded. The Germans were pulling back. They'd held. Somehow, impossibly, they'd held. Crawford appeared at the edge of their foxhole. His uniform was torn and bloody. His face blackened with powder burns, but he was grinning like a madman. "You two look like hell," he said. "Feel like it too, Sarge," Jack replied. "Well, feel like it on your own time. We got casualties that need moving and positions that need reinforcing. Let's go." They climbed out of their foxhole on legs that barely worked. The landscape had been transformed. Where there had been foxholes, now there were craters. Where there had been men, now there were bodies. The snow was no longer white. It was red and black and brown, stained with blood and dirt and things Jack didn't want to think about. "How many did we lose?" Tommy asked quietly. Crawford's grin faded. "Too many. Second squad's down to 4 men. Third squad has 6. We've got maybe 30 effectives left in the whole company." 30? They'd started with over 140. In 3 days of fighting, they'd lost more than 3/4 of their strength. And the Germans just kept coming.
December 19th, 1944, 11:30 p.m. The night watch. That night, Jack and Tommy huddled in their foxhole, sharing a blanket and trying to generate some body heat. The temperature had dropped below 0. Men were beginning to suffer from frostbite, losing fingers and toes to the cold that was as deadly as German bullets. "You still got that letter?" Tommy asked. He meant the letter to Jack's mother, the one Jack had been writing back at Camp Mormillon, a lifetime ago. "Yeah, still in my pocket." "You should finish it. Mail it tomorrow." "Can't. No mail going out. We're surrounded, remember?" "Then finish it anyway. Write it like you might not get another chance." Jack looked at his friend. Tommy's face was serious, older somehow. The easy smile that had been his trademark was gone, replaced by something harder, more realistic. "You writing one to your family?" Jack asked. "Already did. Couple days ago during that lull between attacks. Told Maria." Tommy stopped, his voice catching. "Told her I was proud of her. Told my mom that the money I've been sending home is in an account at First National Bank. Told my little brothers to take care of the family." "Tommy, I'm not being pessimistic, Jackie. I'm being realistic. Look around us. We're surrounded. We're almost out of ammunition. We're freezing to death. The Germans have us outnumbered maybe 10-1, and they're getting reinforcements while we're getting nothing. The math doesn't look good." Jack couldn't argue because Tommy was right. By any objective measure, they were doomed. The 101st Airborne Division, the screaming eagles who jumped into Normandy and fought their way across Europe, were going to be wiped out in a small Belgian town that nobody had ever heard of. Unless they weren't. "You remember what Winters said?" Jack asked. "Back at Toccoa, during training?" Tommy thought for a moment, then nodded. "He said that when everything looks hopeless, that's when you find out what you're really made of." "That's right. And you know what? I know what we're made of. You and me and Crawford and Doc and all these guys. We're made of the same stuff that took this division through Normandy. The same stuff that jumped out of planes with half the German army shooting at us. The same stuff that kept fighting when everyone said we couldn't win. Jackie, we're going to hold this town, Tommy. I don't know how. I don't know what it's going to cost. But we're going to hold it. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. We hold the line." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, a small smile appeared on his face. Not his old easy grin, but something smaller, fiercer, more determined. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay. We hold the line." They sat in silence, watching the darkness, waiting for whatever tomorrow would bring. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of tank engines. The Germans were bringing up armor for the next assault. Somewhere behind them, American artillery crews were rationing their shells, making every round count. The battle for Bastogne had only just begun, and Jack Morrison and Tommy Rodriguez, 2 young men from Pennsylvania and California who'd promised each other they'd both go home or neither would, prepared to keep that promise the only way they knew how, by standing their ground and refusing to break. No matter what came next,